Wedding planners, what made you say this one's not even going to last a year? I have seen brides fight their grooms at the reception. I've seen a bride bash a family member over the head with a bottle of champagne. I've seen small children with burning tea lights at guests from a floor above. I've seen a guest try to fake a slip and fall to sue the venue. Probably the most WTF was a very obviously arranged marriage. Most of the planning was done by the parents, because they were local and the kids were traveling overseas. Red flag. Day of, we meet the happy couple to be. I'm really bad at judging ages, but she seemed at least old enough to consent. And, I should add, she was gorgeous. Could have been a model. The groom, however, almost a foot shorter than she, very lanky, looked like he was squarely in the middle of an adolescent awkward phase. My staff and I had difficulty not giving any outward signs that we were very uncomfortable. The body language was perplexing and then just sad during photos. Culturally, it's not uncommon for PDA to be kept to a minimum, but the way she leaned away from him and could barely look at him, she was so obviously miserable. To this day I regret not offering to help her escape through a bathroom window. I told myself it was not my place to interfere in that. I should just shut up and do my job. I will never take another client without a face-to-face with the bride first. I hope they're not still together. Event manager with a caterer. Pregnant maid of honor told the bride's sister that she's been fricking the groom and the baby is his. She was dead sober, which is what made it so odd that it came out like that. Needless to say, we got to go home early that night. If she were pregnant, I would hope that she was sober, for the kid's sake at least. Oh man. The poor bride was 6 months pregnant at the time of the wedding, puking regularly. The groom was 3 hours late to the ceremony. By hour 2, he hadn't even picked up his tux. The venue almost cancelled the reception because the groom's number was the only contact they had and nobody knew what was going on. He finally showed up and everything went as planned, albeit 3 hours later. Years ago I was a waitress at a fancy restaurant where we regularly had weddings. One night we had this massive wedding party. His side were one of those families with loads of money but not an ounce of class. Just rowdy, loud and incredibly rude, making sure to let everyone know how rich they were. She was a quiet, shy girl with a small family full of boring mousy types. As the night progressed his family just got drunker and louder as hers hid in the corners, visibly annoyed. At one stage the groom grabbed the microphone and did a heavily intoxicated version of Frank Sinatra's My Way whilst his whole family cheered him on. Afterwards he turned to his bride and slurred over the speakers. "Tonight, we will do it my way, wifey," and then proceeded to make doggy style thrusting gestures. The bride flushed bright red, got up and walked out, her mum on her heels. She didn't come back. The groom stayed and got so trashed his disgusting family had to carry him out at the end of the night. It was spectacular. They didn't last long. If someone were writing a novel, and they had the drunk rich butthole husband stand up and sing My Way, I would throw the whole thing in the trash without reading another word because it would be so unbelievable. My Sil. She announced in front of everyone how her wedding was blessed by God and mine wasn't because she was married in the Catholic Church and I had a civil ceremony. 7 years later and I'm the only one still married. Whoa, I can't help but think people who are rude like this in front of a large group make themselves look dumb as opposed to the person they are trying to embarrass. I had a wedding couple come to see me by appointment to plan the music for their church wedding ceremony. They each brought their respective mothers to the planning session. Right out of the gate, they started arguing over choices for the processional. The groom-to-be wanted something to show off the full organ whereas the bride-to-be wanted something smaller scaled and gentle. There was no middle ground, no matter what organ pieces I showed them. Then, of course, their mothers took sides and further intensified their bickering, even though I asked them politely to let the couple choose their own selections. In the end, it really wasn't about the choice of music. It was about a fundamental crack in the foundation of their soon-to-be marriage, an unwillingness to compromise or to even hear what the other was attempting to convey. Sadly, their marriage ended in divorce in less than 2 years. How they made it that long I'll never know. I catered weddings for several years, and the subtle sign I always paid attention to was how closely the bride and groom sat next to each other during the speeches, dinner, etc. The happy couples were always right on top of each other, sharing food, laughing, and just generally chatting. They were in their own world, while the rest of the wedding went on around them. Other times, the two would be practically on the other side of the table from one another. The groom would spend the whole meal turned away chatting with his groomsmen, while the bride looked the other way staring into space. Families can be buttholes, people get drunk, and nightmares happen, especially as the night progresses. But if you don't care enough to appreciate the presence of your spouse the very first time you sit down next to them, you have no chance once the real world takes over. This is very insightful. Thank you. Minister friend did a wedding once where in the vows the woman wouldn't say for richer or poorer, just kept saying for richer or richer, and she wasn't joking. They didn't last long. I used to play bass in a soul band that occasionally played weddings, so I'm not really in the planning business, but I was privy to some shitstorm weddings. The one that sticks out the most wasn't actually a wedding at all. One Saturday afternoon the keys player and I drive up to a rural Texas town for what we assumed was just another wedding. We arrive at a fairly large church and are told to load in our gear into the gym. First thing I noticed that was off is the wedding was Dia de los Muertos themed. It was February. There was a plastic skeleton band at the entrance to the gym. I might still have a picture of it somewhere. We head over to a makeshift stage against the back wall and start setting up. The bride comes up to talk to us and she has fake blood all over her dress to go with the theme. She's in her mid-40s and clearly a huge fan of the band because I recognized her from a few previous shows. She already seemed a little drunk. So we set up, sound check, and we're told to leave the area for the ceremony and we will have our performance and dinner right afterward. So we hang outside the gym shooting the crap for about half an hour before we're told to come back in and play our set. We're all holding our instruments ready to go when the bride steps on stage and takes the mic from the lead singer. She says she's sorry the groom couldn't make it to the wedding, then goes on a long-winded rant about how she doesn't think she'll actually ever get married, and how thankful she is that her dad was still willing to pay for her to have a wedding anyway. So long story short, this woman duped a bunch of people to a fake wedding that her dad paid for. I was sitting there with my mouth open the whole time thinking what the frick is going on. I really wanted to know what happened for the 30 minutes we were sitting outside in the parking lot, but I never got a straight answer. We played the show, people seemed to have an alright time, ate some food, made some cash, but I never forgot the time I played a fake wedding. Dia de los Muertos themed, and soul band. I love it. Was a groomsman in a friend's wedding about 8 years ago. He was in the army and had a chaplain he was friends with officiate it. So we are all standing there listening, trying to act like we are paying attention. The chaplain is going on about couples today sometimes get married for the wrong reason. They don't know each other well enough, don't think things through, or rush into something they aren't ready for. So then he's silent for a moment and they starts the vows. We were all in shock. The parents on both sides were furious. They lasted about 8 months. He was a reservist and got deployed out, was a cop when home, and she started sleeping with his patrol partner. Like 2 days after he left, he got an email from her saying it was over. She wasn't happy, that she hated his husky and had tied her up and left the house a week ago. We all rushed over there as soon as he let some of us know. She was half starved but okay after some food, water and a rush to the vet. Man, frick around all you want but leave the dog be, you she devil. My brother's wedding. Let's just say my brother is the epitome of brothers. I swear he was born wearing a polo shirt and Oakleys. His entire wedding weekend was more about him having to leave his drinking buddies and marrying his wife. The dinner the day before the wedding was at his favorite bar, which happens to be right across the street from his condo. His poor wife didn't get a word in about anything, while the dinner and the reception speeches were just hordes of bros telling drinking stories. One of the bridesmaids tried to say something about the bride and actually got told to shut up by one of the groomsmen. The best man just happened to be my white supremacist uncle who had his Iron Eagle tattoo prominently shown throughout the ceremony. Half of the wedding pictures were my brother and his groomsmen showing off their alcohol-themed socks. Fun time though. A donkey started braying during the ceremony for about 5 minutes and I had the pleasure of hearing my drunken grandma loudly pronounce that this is a crap show. Me and my brother don't get along that well. My drunken grandma loudly pronounced that this is a crap show. I love your grandma. Also, your brother's poor wife, are they still together? Bride warned groom several dozen times, in my presence, If he smashed the cake in her face they would have issues, using phrases like "I am not kidding" or "I am completely serious." Groom was a good old boy type. His friends found out about his bride's one stipulation about the wedding. She was flexible on a lot of other things, but no freaking cake smashing. They started making whip cracking sounds, teasing him that he was whipped and needed to put his foot down and show her who's boss. Yeah, he smashed the cake in her face. She had it annulled. They started making whip cracking sounds, teasing him that he was whipped and needed to put his foot down and show her who's boss. The fact that they think a guy is whipped and he needs to show her who's boss because she makes one rule about something she's uncomfortable with just shows what incredible buttholes they are. Not a planner, but a photographer. Bride and groom both lovely people, but the groom's mother. At the reception she got so drunk that she leaned over in her chair and just puked on the floor. She spent the next 2 hours wailing and crying because she told everybody thought her son deserved better. As I was packing equipment back into my car, I spotted Mill in the bushes, dress around her head, legs in the air and a group of people trying to get her out. I later found out that she crapped herself at a later point in the evening, and the bride spent time cleaning her up. Didn't think the marriage would survive with a toxic Mill like that around. Then I saw on social media that the bride and groom moved overseas, far away from their families. I love a happy ending. Obligatory not a wedding planner. I worked as a receptionist for a conservatory and garden. We were an extremely popular wedding venue 7 days a week year round. But this is the one that stuck out. A couple of families came in on a Sunday afternoon during business hours. They were dressed very nicely, but again, was a Sunday, so not all that unusual. There appeared to be an older teen girl, a boy around the same age, their respective parents, and a smattering of grandparents. Looking back on it, with the exception of a couple of the grandmas, everyone looked either ill or angry. Everyone but one of the fathers paid their admission and went inside. The father made it known to me he was still waiting for someone. No big deal. Well, about 10-15 minutes later, in came a priest. Black robes, white collar, the works. It then occurs to me that all these people must be here to scope it out as a wedding venue. I took the admission, then went to get our on-site wedding coordinator, in case the family wanted to see her. I find her, and we start heading towards where I last saw the group. We were floored to see them by our water feature very obviously conducting a wedding. Very obviously a shotgun wedding that the kids had no control over. Was startling and funny and sad all at once. With the amount of strong arming they got, I doubt they lasted. Please tell me your advisor butted in and kicked them out. I can't believe they would just show up and conduct a wedding out of the blue, especially at a place that charges for that. Wedding photographer here. Two things come to mind. In one instance the bride and groom just could not be bothered to be seen together at the wedding. I had to virtually drag them for getting some photos of the two of them together and they kept walking off hang out with their friends. It would be one thing if they hadn't seen their friends in forever, but one friend they lived with and the others were in the same town. The other one was a groom who looked like he was 16. He was actually 21 but was tiny and looked young. When I started taking photos he said, "In all seriousness, you have to tell me what I need to do. This is my first time getting married, I'll do better next time." Turns out the wedding only happened because the bride's mother was dying and the bride wanted her mother to see her get married. I'm wedding planner as well as officiant. I forgot to ask for and sign this couple's marriage license. I sign and send to the county for recording. So I texted the bride and she said, "Oh, no need, we haven't gotten our license yet and we'll do it legally a different day." Ok. A few months later she's with husband, not husband's BFF, and now they're engaged. I wonder if she'll be a repeat customer of mine? Repeat customers should get a voucher for free ice cream or something. Another not a wedding planner, but story. The night before our wedding, my husband and I were staying at the hotel we would be getting married at the next day. Another couple had gotten married there that night and our room happened to be right next to theirs. The couple had decided to continue the party in their room, blasting music, screaming at their friends from the balcony, and generally making so much noise at such a late time that we called the front desk. The next night, our own wedding was done. We were hanging out in our room, gorging on leftover cupcakes, and getting ready to go to bed. The couple next to us, It turns out, had decided to stay an extra night, but this time they were screaming at each other. We couldn't figure out what exactly was going on, but we clearly heard the woman yell, "I can't talk to you when you have your pouty face." 3 years later we still use that on each other and it instantly diffuses any argument. I often wonder what happened to them. I know a guy from college who broke his fiance's diamond engagement ring against a wall in a drunken rage while they were engaged. They still got married, but it has not been a year yet. We're convinced it won't last the year. Well, I'm the best man in an upcoming wedding, so I'm definitely involved in some of the planning. Just found out yesterday that it's already a sexless, affectionless relationship, so I give it a year tops. My poor bastard of a best friend thinks getting married will make it better. I think he is in for a surprise. It all makes me very sad. I'm a baker, not a wedding planner, but I deal with them and weddings constantly. Once was doing setup in a venue for this monster cake for 500 guests and a dessert table. Usually with something that big and expensive, I'll stick around and ask the couple or the planner for approval before I leave. I finish and ask for the WP's approval and she comes in, sweaty and frizzled, and tells me it's okay, and I explain how to cut the thing, because it was so big if you didn't do it right it would topple. I ask her what is wrong, because she's out of it, not paying attention. She explains that the bride's boyfriend showed up to the reception space to get into the bridal suite, with the groom's boyfriend in tow. It was a shit show and people were going crazy fighting in the bridal suite. She thought it was going to come to fisticuffs. I came back to pick up the setup pieces for the dessert table the next day. Somehow they went through with the wedding, but that wasn't going to last. Not a wedding planner, but tomorrow a friend's 18-year-old sister is getting married to a 33-year-old man with 2 kids after being engaged for 3 weeks. I have a very bad feeling about the marriage. Hope I'm wrong and it lasts, but the whole thing gives me a creepy vibe. So he basically is marrying a babysitter. My mother plays harp for weddings in Colorado. My grandparents have lived off and on near Rocky Mountain National Park for the last 25 years, so we are very familiar with the finicky weather around one of Colorado's most spectacular wedding destinations. 10 years ago my mother planned her own wedding a stone's throw from the park. She knows the area is what I'm saying. If she says it might snow in April, it might snow in April. Why some people hire locals for their wedding and then refuse to listen to them is beyond me. Yes, it is cheaper than June. There's a reason for that. Wedding pro tip: if your wedding needs to be outside in Rocky Mountain National Park, schedule an indoor venue as a backup and be ready to use it. YMCA of the Rockies is always good and you will still have your pretty butt mountains to look at. After one too many bride, planner, or parent has stamped their feet upon having to bend one iota to the weather in a place that has a lot of it, she now has a weather clause written into her contract. She has spent 5 snowy April weddings with her harp tucked warm and safe inside her car, watching guests shiver miserably as they contemplate hiking up to the altar or church on top of a hill or whatever little blizzarding paradise they've stuck with. 5 people who refuse to compromise on their vision for their special day to the point that they're standing on a hill in a snowstorm. Miserable, surrounded by all the miserable people who know them. Imagine seeing your bride or your groom force everyone to sit in a goddamned blizzard in formal wear and throw a tantrum about something totally uncontrollable but also totally preventable. Mom has no problem cashing their checks at all. I imagine she doesn't get hired for their 2nd and 3rd weddings, but there's no shortage of clients anyway. This is actually my own story. The night before our wedding, my husband-to-be and I were out celebrating. We had a few drinks and then went out for dinner afterwards. As we were leaving the restaurant we noticed a slab of cement that was just freshly poured. He bent down to carve our initials in the wet cement. As a romantic gesture, he carves his first, which were A, and then as he went to carve mine, he asked, should I carve KM or KH? Well, KM isn't my initials but those are his ex, Kelly. I dated a Kelly once. Total freaking C. I'm not a wedding planner, though I was a wedding guest. The bride had a father who was mortgaging his home to pay for the wedding. She had been given everything as a child and became accustomed to life on a silver platter. She worked for Christian Dior in makeup sales and therefore insisted everything must be designer. She had a destination wedding that lasted a month at a villa in Italy. More than 50 people flew out and she had designer dresses and accessory for every single planned event for an entire month. There were non-stop events planned. She was the star of everything. Her husband was an afterthought and only beckoned for pictures when her personal photographer reminded her that they should take some together. The extravagance of the wedding put my estimate at 2 years tops. They made it about 2 years, pregnancy likely playing a big part in the longevity of the 2-year marriage. The father of the bride ended up living in the spare room of her condo with her and her new husband because the fathers of the bride had a wife that was not the bride's mother and the cost of the wedding was so outrageous that they divorced over it. Father of the bride was a sales rep for a medical company, not a millionaire. Bride gives no fricks because everything is about her and what she wants regardless of who it harms or affects. Rule of thumb: the more extravagant the wedding, the more likely they are compensating for a hollow relationship. Holy heck, you know your wedding is a disaster when it ruins someone else's marriage. Not wedding planner, but cook. Worked at a golf resort. We had open, green areas, lots of mid-fancy seating, various venues, etc. I used to run most of the banquets for my chef. He'd hand me planning sheets, I'd do the order, if he hadn't already, prep and cook everything day of, and have it out, hot, and ready to eat. He handed me a single sheet, telling me it was a 50-person buffet, with a grin on his face. I knew that grin. Looked over the menu. It was garbage. Steamed broccoli, the absolute bottom of the barrel cheapest ham product from Sysco, rolls and butter, large salads with only 3 dressing choices, mashed potatoes, nothing else on the food docket. I asked if he was serious. He was. Told me they were total cheapskates and really were jerks. If they want dirt cheap, they'll get dirt cheap. Venue is the horrid awning next to the kart park. Basically a concrete slab with a grassy area next to it and an awning where the golf carts usually went. Facilities would move the carts, and that's where I'd set up. Front house would have 2 buffet lines for me. Talked to bartender. No bartender. But they were getting some horrid pea beer, and only 2 6-packs of it, and some horrid champagne ripoff that was $3 bottle. 3 bottles of it. Yep. Day of. I am out there in my chef coat getting my tables set up as I want them. Front house always mucks this stuff up. People start arriving, so I rush back, finish the last item, the broccoli, in the steamer, and into the hot box with it. I wheel out, am set up in 5 minutes. I've got to back up pre-cut ham and juice, a backup mashed taters, a backup salad, and a backup broccoli. The weak sauce alcohol selection is out with plastic champagne flutes. Front house is guarding it. I wondered why. Then I realized. Bride and groom were maybe 18. Maybe. The 2 fathers were drinking pea beer, doing their best not to look at each other. The groom was pee himself in a rented tux. The bride and bridesmaids were gossiping like teen girls do, paying him very little mind. The mothers of the newlyweds were staring daggers at each other from across the concrete slab. I looked a touch closer at the blushing bride and, yep, just barely showing a baby bump. This was a shotgun wedding due to unprotected teen sex I was catering. The guests barely touched the food, though they did eat all the salad and all the ranch dressing. The unused ham went back to the kitchen, never out on buffet, and then into ham and bean soup later. Cream of broccoli for the unused broccoli, etc. I don't even give that a year. After reading these stories, I feel like there needs to be a follow-up Reddit thread about people who have been in or witnessed shotgun weddings and what became of them, but my inbox is battered and abused. We had friends taking bets at our wedding on how long we were going to last. Most of them confessed they bet 6 months. I couldn't really blame them. We were together less than a year, just turned 18 and both going into the military. Worked out though. Celebrating 11 years next month. If only we got all those bets in writing, we'd be rich. Getting married young and for no apparent reason is a major military tradition. Did it, divorced him, but we're on decent terms and he likes my new husband and I like his new wife, so a lot better than most military divorces. Met a few weeks earlier. Groom's friends were taking bets on how long the marriage would last. Both of them HS dropouts, from white trash families. Bride wore a black dress. My parents have been married now for 51 years. I do wedding photography. Can I play? I second shot at a very large, Extravagant wedding. The wedding party were all sorority sisters and fraternity brothers at rival schools. There were 24 of them, 12 bridesmaids, 12 groomsmen. The couple's family had clearly spent a lot of money, especially on the decorations. Also, Ben Stein was there for some reason. The first thing the father of the bride said to me was a complaint about the groom. The groom didn't like the way the suits turned out and insisted that all of the men return to the shop that morning to get something else. Those poor menswear shop employees. I met the groom when it was time to do groomsmen photos, which I generally handled solo while the main photographer did bridesmaid photos. We typically do some posed shots and some informal ones. Well, the groom flat out refused to do any posed photos. I can usually convince reluctant subjects to just do the thing, but he absolutely would not do a single group photo. I seem to remember I finally managed to get some informal photos, like I was their paparazzi or something, but that was all he'd allow. As we were walking back to the main reception area, he told me he didn't even want to get married. This is all her thing. My photos weren't very good. I was working for this butthole studio manager, and I figured I'd get in trouble later and possibly wouldn't be hired again, but there wasn't much I could do. Photogs were responsible for specific coverage and types of images, to the point that we were on the hook financially. I was worried the couple would complain later about the lack of groomsmen photos. As it turns out, nobody ever said anything about it, and I was stressing over nothing. I have to imagine the studio owner knew about the groomzilla after planning coverage with them. I sometimes think about that couple. I hope they're not together anymore. The bride was really sweet, if not even a little superficial. She put a lot of work into that wedding. I hope she found someone who deserved it. My brother just got married a week ago. Everyone kept telling him the week leading up to the wedding that it's not too late to back out, even her family. I think that's a pretty good sign. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.